Hey everyone, and welcome back. Now today I wanted to talk about the render network because I really do think DEPIN is a super exciting niche within crypto that provides a lot of exciting possibilities for the future, primarily only realized because of the technology that crypto provides. This is kind of like a paradigm shift, similar to like what we saw with Uber or Airbnb or things like that in the internet. A technology like that really could not have existed prior to the internet. And so, I view kind of DEPIN generally the same way. And render, I think a lot of us are seeing as being one of the, super interesting and super high profile projects within that subsector. And so I wanted to go in and talk about it a little bit further. So let's go on ahead and dive right in. So to start out, we can see that, this is basically just on the render network. And from their website, they essentially are kind of addressing the problem that they're solving and kind of how they're doing it. So ultimately, one of the main issues that we would be running into with an AI and kind of a metaverse type of future world, I guess you could call it, is going to be the rendering of all of this information that needs to be processed, right? So obviously with AI, GPUs are a very common form of helping essentially run the AI algorithms and training the model. That can be a very labor intensive from a computational perspective. It can be a very labor intensive process, as well as with video rendering. If we're going to be having these infinite metaverses, a lot of this is going to need to be real-time rendered in a lot of circumstances. And so what we're going to need for that is decentralized compute. The other thing that render wants to kind of help address as well is if you are looking to render through the cloud, odds are you're probably using AWS, just because AWS I think controls 80 or 85% of all of the cloud compute infrastructure on the internet, which is fine, good for Amazon. That's why they're a multi-trillion-dollar company, but it does provide a single point of failure. I'm sure if you've been tuned into the news over the past couple years, we can see the risk that single points of failure pose. One of the most recent ones being CrowdStrike. Prior to that, I think there was an outage with AWS, and that impacted Facebook and Twitter and several airlines and some banks, and there's a lot of people that rely on these single points of failure. And while they don't at least seem to fail often, when they do fail, the impact is pretty dramatic. And so a decentralized network can really help with this, because ultimately what you're doing is you're leveraging the network of everyday people, and through a widely decentralized and dispersed population in geographic area, right? And so the odds of all of these things going down at once are relatively low without some very, very globally catastrophic issue happening, right? And so ultimately that's kind of the point of render and what they're looking to do. There's a lot of DEPIN projects who are looking to tackle this problem, just because it is a large problem, and it's also a very lucrative problem to tackle as well. So the main four ways that render is looking to do this is essentially network scalability, efficient infrastructure, a better use of GPU power, and then digital rights management. These are kind of big things within the video rendering infrastructure, right? So network scalability, they're saying, making next generation 3D rendering widely accessible for the content demands of immersive media requires exponential increases in computing scale that is only possible through a decentralized global network, which does seem to make sense, right? Because, if I'm asleep and I'm not using my computer, that could essentially be linked to this global decentralized network, which otherwise would be wasted. And I think that's kind of the promise of a lot of these decentralized networks, is because people aren't using a lot of their stuff with 100% uptime. So when it's not being used, just contribute it to the network, and it makes essentially a more efficient infrastructure, which here's the next point, right? So most GPUs sit idle when not in use locally. Meanwhile, artists and developers struggle scale cloud rendering and computing work. The render network provides a two-sided marketplace for efficiency, coordinating global GPU compute supply and demand. So essentially, I think there might be a typo in there. I think they're meaning to say struggle to scale cloud rendering and computing work. But regardless, essentially what they're wanting is just to essentially use the technology or use the hardware efficiently, right? And so if I'm only using my computer, let's say 25% of the time. The other 75% of the time, it's contributing to this decentralized network, but I'm also getting paid for it as well, which makes it more efficient on both sides, of the coin, right? And so the third one we have is a better use of GPU power. And this is something that, a lot of crypto critics kind of complain about, and I feel like it's not completely unwarranted, but ultimately, what they're saying is, decentralized GPU resources are wasted in proof-of-work cryptocurrency mining. Render unlocks the full productive potential of decentralized GPU computing to power the next generation 3D content creation and artificial intelligence. They're essentially saying, instead of putting your GPU to work solving a math problem, go ahead and put it to work using rendering, which we actually see some sort of tangible result for, right? Where obviously there is a purpose for proof of work, at least in my opinion, but I do understand kind of the, having a better use for that GPU power. The next thing, and the final thing that they have, which I think is pretty interesting, is next generation immersive media and artificial intelligence require new forms of authentication and provenance. The render network provides granular digital rights management through on-chain traceability of a node-based render graph. This is very interesting, right? Because a lot of things that we've been seeing in the digital world is, how do you claim ownership for something when copy paste exists, right? Like that is something that is a problem. And I think if and when we, somebody can solve that through using Web3 and blockchain and integrating that correctly into kind of the existing infrastructure that we have, that's going to be a really, that's going to be a really big deal. And that's going to be a very lucrative problem to solve as well. So the next thing I wanted to look at was the render price. So as we saw, kind of in March, when everything was doing really well, it peaked at a price of $13.17. And then it's kind of since climbed down to about a low of $4. And now we've jumped back up to about $6.34. So that's looking pretty good so far. Obviously during this pullback, when everybody was, super afraid and wondering if crypto was over and all this type of stuff, that would have been good to, potentially buy some if you do have conviction in render. Again, not financial advice. You need to make your own decisions with that type of stuff. But, this is something where, it's only at a 2.4 billion market cap, which is, I would say, relatively low, and definitely provides some room to run, especially given, the problems that they're attempting to tackle here. What we do see here, though, is a fully diluted valuation of 3.3 billion, which is, it's got a decent bit more to dilute. Like I always love doing is, looking at the market cap. Given the recent pump in the price of render, the market cap essentially mirrors the price chart relatively closely. So, this is all looking pretty decent. But that is something to know that, there is a fair bit more to be diluted. So the next thing I wanted to look at is that I did a quick bit of technical analysis on the render chart just so we could kind of see what we're looking at. Overall, it looked kind of like we had, kind of a trend line that we were following on the way down. We did manage to break out of that, which was good. And now we're sitting on this, it looks to be kind of a small level of support here. The next thing that we're going to have to break is this resistance sitting at around $7. And then after that, we've got another point of resistance at about $9.38-ish, roughly. Again, I like to consider this stuff more as like zones rather than a particular point. And then once we break that, you probably got a little bit more of, support somewhere around the $11-ish range. And then after that, we're essentially looking to test new all-time highs. So, those are kind of the things I'm looking at with the chart. But overall, the chart looks relatively decent. You might be wondering, why this isn't going back further, even though this project was launched in 2020. And this is something that we'll actually cover right now, which is Render just transitioned from the Ethereum to the Solana network. Now, I'm sure there's a fair bit of you who might feel some type of way about that, whether it's positively or negatively. I'll kind of maybe hold on that for a future video. But what we can see is in November of 2023, Render essentially decided to upgrade its technical architecture by migrating from Ethereum to Solana. So not only did this upgrade involve some backend type of stuff, but one thing it did involve was moving from the Render token, which is RNDR, which is an ERC20 token, to the new Render token, which is an SPL or a Solana token. So this is something that obviously was made as a decision to help the scalability of the project. I think what they were looking for, and at least what the CEO said, This I read in a previous article, but the CEO essentially thought that Solana was a better option for future scalability, given the like web level scale of their blockchain. Maybe we won't mention the uptime issues, but assuming that those get fixed, I assume it's not necessarily a too bad of a decision. I do think there are a lot of DEPIN projects moving to Solana, so I do think that there is something there for sure that these guys are seeing. The lingering issue does remain that it does have these uptime issues. It does have a ton of failed transactions. There are a lot of these things that aren't necessarily perfect, when it comes to a blockchain that you would expect to be doing, a decent amount of volume in terms of transactions. So that's something to consider, when doing your research into Render is, the fact that it has moved from Ethereum to Solana. One thing I will say though, that I do find pretty optimistic or bullish potentially for Render is the fact that with Solana, obviously the fees are going to be infinitely lower. And then, the throughput of the blockchain is actually very high. So that's a good thing. Obviously the uptime is kind of the issue there, but if the uptime issue becomes fixed, then I think this would probably be a pretty good transition that everybody, Solana, Render holders, Solana holders, everyone will be happy with. So ultimately, if you are an old Render holder, you can see it still does exist as of August. But they are over time going to be phasing it out. You can convert your Ethereum Render to Solana Render, and that is something that you still are able to do. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. Like, you still can participate in like governance votes and whatnot, but you can't actually use the Ethereum Render on the Render like network app anymore. So that's just something to know if you are like an old Render holder. Anyway, hopefully this deep dive into Render did help answer a lot of pending questions that you may have had. If you have any other follow-up questions or anything you'd like me to dive into particularly within Render, please do let me know. Like I've said, basically every video, I do read all my comments, and so if there's something that you're unclear on or you want me to dive a little bit further into, just bring it up, and I will either dedicate another video to it, or I can just answer the question in the comment section as well. But in addition, if you did find the information in this video useful, please do give me a like and subscribe. It really does help me out. And thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.